Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and dive on in. So hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us with our Meet the Ocean Ocean Life webinar. My name is Deanne Chapman, and I'm the State Director for Alaska Environment, and I'll be your moderator today for the panel. I live in Anchorage, Alaska, and in Denaina land. So my closest ocean ecosystem is Cook Inlet, home to belugas and salmon and a whole lot of other incredible wildlife. And this is the second webinar in a series of webinars that we're holding in June, which is World Ocean Month, to learn more about our oceans. I think that it's probably safe to assume that everyone on this webinar loves the ocean and probably knows some about the threats that it faces between offshore oil drilling, plastic pollution, overfishing, fertilizer runoff, sound pollution, etc. However, despite over 70% of our planet being covered in ocean, I think in a lot of ways it's still often a mystery to us. We lack a lot of familiarity. And so that's why we're taking some time this month to learn more from folks who either study the ocean, depend on the ocean, advocate for ocean ecosystems. This panel specifically will spend time focused on some of the incredible wildlife in our ocean and how our communities interact with them and what's necessary to protect some of those vibrant ocean ecosystems. So today on our panel, we have Dr. Lauren Devine, the Reverend Tiffany Nicely-Hollick, Chanelle Heason, and Bob Bailey. And we're going to start with Dr. Lauren Devine, who is the Director of the Ecosystem Conservation Office for the Aleut community of St. Paul Island. And she's absolutely key to the efforts to protect the ocean ecosystems surrounding the Pribilof Islands in the Bering Sea. And so I'll hand it over to Lauren to get started.
Good afternoon or good day, everyone. My name is Lauren Devine, and I'm the Director for the Ecosystem Conservation Office for the Aleut Community of St. Paul Island, which is a very long title for a tribe that lives in the middle of the Bering Sea of Alaska. I'm currently joining from Denaina lands in Anchorage, but I live and work on Ununga lands in St. Paul. Give me one moment to just share and get into presentation mode. And then hopefully now you see a beautiful picture of St. Paul on a sunny day. I have the pleasure to just walk you through a little bit about our ocean ecosystem and share with you some of the ocean life that we are working to recover, to stabilize, to grow and protect on the islands of St. Paul and St. George, which make up the Pribilof Islands and the marine ecosystem around us in the Bering Sea. Just to orient you, we are the Pribilof Islands. It's actually a series of 5 islands close to the Bering Sea slope on the Bering Sea shelf in Alaska. And we are close to nothing, but we're in the center of everything, we say. So there are 2 inhabited islands with communities living on them. St. Paul has about 450 Ununga residents or Aleut, and St. George has about 60. And it's a beautiful, beautiful ecosystem. There are 3 uninhabited islands that are also full of wildlife. Otter Island is named for the shape of the island, not for the presence of otters on the island. And we also have Walrus Island, not named for walrus either. But then we also have Sea Lion Rock, which is a small outcropping close to St. Paul. And so those are the 5 islands of the Pribilofs. Before I dive into our wildlife, I want to talk just a little bit and give you, 4,000 years of history in one slide. There is a legend of Igadaga that Aleut know, which is the son of a chief from the Aleutian chain that went and discovered the Pribilofs by listening to the sounds of fur seals in his ikya or kayak. The pre-contact culture of the Aleutian chains, where the peoples of the Pribilofs are ancestry to, is estimated up to 20 to 30,000 inhabitants. That was a seafaring culture, marine mammal hunters, seabird hunters, harvesters, and the Pribilofs were known but not inhabited by Ununga for eons and used as hunting grounds, but not permanently inhabited until the late 1700s, when Russian fur traders stole and enslaved Aleut men and took them to the islands after discovering fur seal colonies on St. Paul and St. George, where they created camps and forced Unanga to harvest fur seals for the pelts, and those pelts were sold in European markets for a great sum of money. In fact, when the US purchased Alaska as a territory from Russia, the sale of fur seal pelts paid for the state. Not many people know that. Then there was an unfortunate secondary removal of people from their islands. From St. Paul and St. George in the 1940s, the US government interned or took the entire residential populations of the islands to Southeast Alaska during World War II, and they lived there in abandoned cannery for years until they were finally allowed to return back to the islands. But every year, the US government would take again, men from the camps and take them back out to the Pribilof Islands to harvest fur seals. So this is a really traumatic history. It's a very short history of permanent inhabitation of the islands, and it is very much centered around fur seal as a resource, as an extractive resource and monetary gain for first the Russian and then the US government. Here's the star of our islands. This is Lakuda, or northern fur seal. The world population of fur seals is majorly located on St. Paul. So we have about 75% of the world's breeding population of Lakuda. You can see a mom and a pup, and then there is a sea lion that snuck into the center image. We also have other marine mammals that inhabit, forage, and use the islands for breeding. Stellar sea lions are part of the western population segment, which is considered endangered in Alaska, and we're part of that population segment. But we do have breeding and foraging sea lions around the islands throughout the year, as well as harbor seals. We are part of migratory routes for many whale species, and occasionally we get a walrus or an ice seal. So we have just a lot of different marine mammals that migrate through the area, that breed in the region. But fur seals are really the heart and soul of our communities. They're so inextricably linked to our communities through the community harvests of fur seal as a subsistence or traditional food, through the hunting of fur seals, and just through crafting, through regalia, through song and dance, just every part of it, especially environmental stewardship of the islands, everything is connected to fur seals. There's a couple of our elders in the community that are, one is butchering fur seal on the island through a community harvest, and he's actually teaching a class at this time. Was probably pretty mad I took a picture of him, but to try to pass on how to butcher and prepare seal. And then the other image is in this elder's home as he is soaking and preparing the meat, and also again passing on the traditions of how to cook and prepare the actual meals for his family. This is our community after a fur seal harvest. And so this is something that everything from babies to young youth to young adults to our elders and everyone in between participates in. It's very community focused. It's a time of learning. It's a time of physical exercise, of sharing stories, of passing on skills. And this is something that occurs every summer in St. Paul for us. And this is a typical crowd that will come out to help, to watch, and to just participate in whatever way they can. Beyond fur seals, we have so much rich marine life that inhabits the islands or uses it at different times of the year. So I mentioned earlier, we have other marine mammals. There's certainly marine mammal hunting of sea lions on the islands, as well as fur seals. We occasionally get whales stranded on the islands, but we know these islands were not whale hunters. They did not develop that skill out of the sheer abundance of whales that used to wash into the islands with higher abundances of whales in Alaska in general in the past. And the waters would keep the whales so cold that when they washed up on shore, the whale could be harvested from the carcass. So there was no need to develop whale hunting skills because there was that resource was abundantly available. Walrus was the same type of tradition. We have tons of seabirds. There is amazing amount of cliff space on both islands in the Pribilofs, and so we get everything from red and black-legged kittiwakes to common and thick-billed murres, lots of seagull species. We get tufted and horned puffins, all kinds of auklets, and all of these birds, cormorants, red-faced, and cormorants and guillemots, and a lot of these birds are not only used for their meat and hunted for the actual bird meat, but also harvested as eggs. So there's a rich tradition of egging on the islands, which is fascinating if you ever look into it. And we also have a directed halibut fishery. This is both a commercial enterprise for us. So it's a huge piece of our economy is directed halibut fishing with long lines from small vessels less than 60 feet, mostly family owned boats. You can see two brothers here that are part of a family of now 3 boats in the fleet that fish for halibut, but also harvest snow crab, king crab, Pacific cod, and squid and octopus, and all kinds of sea life in and around the Pribilof Islands. These are such amazing grounds of productivity. The oceanography, the currents, all really create such a productive space that we have rich resources around us. And then the other image is a picture of a thick-billed murre with an egg. So you can see the type of eggs that are prized in the community and are requested now by elders as egging has gone down in the number of people practicing that tradition. Just a little bit more. So I mentioned some of this. The Marine Mammal Protection Act has listed Lakuda as depleted. They do not have any type of Endangered Species Act listing, but they are considered depleted, and we've are now down to less than 1/4 of the historical maximum. So there was a historical max of 2.1 million animals. We're now at about 475,000 animals, and a majority of that population again is occurring on St. Paul Island. The adult males hold territories, and they have females that they hold on the islands, and they arrive first to establish those territories. The females arrive shortly after. They give birth to a pup within a few days of arriving on shore on the rocky rookeries of the islands. You can see in that bottom picture, it's pretty bouldery or rocky. And they're going to give birth to one pup. They nurse that pup throughout the summer. And then in between nursing sessions, they're going out to sea trying to find food to resupply their milk and come back and nurse that pup. So if the females can access a lot of food, they can take short trips, they can nurse more, and the pups are heavier. If they can't find food, they have to forage for longer, and those pups are going to receive less milk over the summer. And then everyone migrates off the islands in the fall, and the pups spend the next 2 years at sea learning how to forage and feed and survive on their own, dive for food until they come back and start practicing how to hold territories as well. One of the big issues that I want to highlight as we're thinking about how we're protecting and conserving ocean life is marine debris. We have a huge problem with marine debris, and you can see the picture on the left, I'm sorry it's grainy, is just a bunch of trash that we've collected during one of our annual marine debris cleanups, just a fraction. Typically, we're picking up over 20,000 pounds every cleanup, and it just refills in so quickly and concentrates on the islands. And the picture on the right is 2 of our youth that just went out one afternoon and helped us pick up some trash, and within half an hour you can pick up multiple bags, buoys, and large pieces of debris. And this is mostly fishing related gear that we're seeing year after year on our island. But this is one thing that is a huge threat to our northern fur seals. We see a lot of entanglement of animals. You can see typically what we're seeing is pieces of or fragments of trawl nets. And this is just a fraction of the animals that are probably getting entangled because most of them probably die at sea. The young juveniles are more likely to be curious and get entangled in some of this gear. And so typically they're like swimming through it and it's getting around their neck. They can't get out, and then they just continue to grow and they can't get out of that debris. And so we operate a disentanglement program on our island, but again, we're seeing a fraction of the animals that are probably getting entangled and dying out at sea from this type of debris. So we're very concerned. All of these issues are related. All of them relate back to our ocean life. And this is just kind of a snapshot of like why we do what we do and the type of ocean life that we're trying to protect on the islands and why. Part of this, this little snapshot feeds into a comprehensive effort that we're taking. It's called the Pribilof Islands Marine Ecosystem Initiative. Our first step was to submit a formal nomination for a marine sanctuary, and that was to the National Marine Sanctuaries Program. We put in maps like this that show just the importance of the upwelling, the currents, the oceanography, and then also important habitat and feeding areas and spawning grounds or nursery habitat for all of the ocean life that we have. We're part of important bird areas. It just shows you kind of a layering of how important and how much ocean life depends on the region. And so this nomination for a National Marine Sanctuary is the first step of a long-term goal for the tribal government of St. Paul to achieve equitable and local management of our ocean life and of our resources, and start to address the environmental concerns while we still maintain the ability to grow, economically and provide for the island communities. So, this is a lot. Here's just a simplified map showing just, for instance, the area that is used by northern fur seals and by seabirds when they're out there foraging. And you can see it's a huge area, and we're just trying to protect some area in the Pribilofs around the vicinity to address and provide for our ocean life well into the future. We often think, oh, sorry, I'm gonna go to that slide. So while I finish up, we're thinking 7 generations ahead. So everything that we do, we're really thinking holistically, and we know we have to take bite-sized chunks of conservation. And so this is kind of our first step, but hopefully we'll have some questions, but I hope I just gave you a good view of kind of our ocean life and the importance and connection to our communities.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lauren. That was all so interesting, and what an incredible place. And oh my goodness, I'm so excited to hear more about it with questions. That's a good thing for everyone to know. There's a Q&A box that you can put questions in. And after we go through our panelists, we'll have a few minutes that we can take questions at the end. So if you've got questions, go ahead and put those in there. Wonderful. Well, next up, we have the Reverend Tiffany Nicely-Hollick. She is one of the pastors at St. Peter's Lutheran Church in Harwich, Massachusetts, on Wampanoag Land on Cape Cod, very near Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary. And she's been involved in efforts to protect the area, and given where she's lived, she's also had the opportunity to sail and kayak near Stellwagen as well. And so I am going to share some slides for her, and I'm going to hand it over to Tiffany.
Not yet. We're going to do it in a minute. I'll give you a cue. Thank you. So hi, everyone. From the other side of the country, Lauren, hello. And our story here is a lot shorter than yours because this has only been since 1992, not 10,000 years, but welcome. I am speaking from unceded Nauset land on Harwich, Massachusetts, and we use our arms and show that this is where we live, way out at the elbow. I am, in addition to being a pastor, I'm a mother and a sailor, and one small voice speaking out for creation care. Where we live is near Stellwagen, and we have this amazing thing that happens every year in April or May when the herrings start to run. And environmentalist John Hay lived right out here in the same town I live and taught us about him. Used to be that we could drive by and watch the herring come in from the Stellwagen bank up Paynes Creek into the upper and lower mill ponds. And it was a huge draw for locals and for visitors alike to stand in awe of these little fish that would leave the open ocean and salt water and come up into fresh water through this horrible system of jumps and locks. And then they would spend some time in that fresh water before going back down to the ocean. And they had to navigate all that and avoid the seagulls at the same time. When my daughter was in 6th grade, she had some of the standardized tests that all school kids in this country have to do. And she had this question in actually one of the English lessons about eelgrass. And for her, it was a chance to think about human impact on the natural world and the consequences that we cannot see of what we do and how it plays out over generations. So when I was invited to go visit Senator Ed Markey's office to do some ocean advocacy, she asked if she could come with us. And she did. And actually, it was Senator Markey's staffers that wanted to talk to her rather than to the adults. That was with Lutherans Restoring Creation. We then got on someone's radar screen and started doing some work with Creation Justice Ministries, which is a multi-faith group in Washington, D.C. that gets a lot of different religious leaders together on the basis of faith to care for creation. With Creation Justice Ministries, we went and did advocacy with our local, with Senator Elizabeth Warren, and talked about Stellwagen and needing to protect it. First slide, please. The Stellwagen National Marine Sanctuary is a part of the Gulf of Maine. It's about 30 miles off of the coast of Cape Cod, due north of Provincetown. You can see it in the pink or purple outline there. Provincetown is that tip of the arm way out there. And it's about 842 square miles. So it's pretty small, actually. Unlike national parks, you can't really easily get out to see a national marine sanctuary. You can visit it by boat, and most often people get out there on whale watching or because they're fishing it. Or if you're like me, you're lucky and you get to sail through a corner of it and see what you can see. Stellwagen Bank was nominated for National Marine Sanctuary status by the work of the Center for Coastal Studies in Provincetown, Massachusetts, and the Defenders of Wildlife in Washington, D.C. They were working together and they managed to do that nomination in 1982. There was a long process of study and work, and in 1992, Stellwagen actually became a National Marine Sanctuary. It is currently up for review of its regulations and management plans. The NOAA team, the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, are the ones that administer the regulations there. And they had lots of conversation with scientists and environmentalists and with the fishing communities out here. What's surprising is that the NOAA director, Dr. Spinrad, asked for the perspectives of other people who cared about it, and Creation Justice Ministries offered up a few of us to do that, to help educate us, to inspire us to get involved and to become advocates. Our concern with this new management plan is that there is some unsustainable human impact if the regulations go through the way they are right now. We are really concerned about climate change's impact on the Stellwagen Bank in particular, and we are wondering about how we're going to keep this really amazing place amazing. We can take the slide off for right now if you don't mind. The human impact of it with being a National Marine Sanctuary means that we can't drill for oil, and that's great because it's going to protect the wildlife there and keep it more pristine for longer. We do have to change what and how we fish and what we expect to eat from those waters. Now remember, I'm from Cape Cod. Unfortunately, it's getting harder and harder to find cod out here. There, in fact, over the last few years has been a market for dogfish, which I don't know if any of you have ever heard of, but the local fishers and restaurateurs are trying to work together to create a market for dogfish so that we don't feel like we have to eat cod only. One of my neighbors is a scalloper, and he has to go out further and further and stay out longer in order to get what they need to bring to market. And when he comes back to shore, the prices of those scallops is going higher and higher. He acknowledges this isn't sustainable. We need to protect this. In terms of climate change, the climate, in Stellwagen Bank is warming particularly fast. It's over 50% faster than anywhere else out here, and then the other parts of the ocean, and we're seeing the impacts of that. What I see is that the whales are coming earlier and the herring are running earlier because the water is just getting warmer and they don't stay out as long. It also means that the great white sharks are coming closer to shore much earlier and much more frequently because the water is warm enough for them. Slide 2, please. The biggest wildlife that we're mostly concerned about is the North Atlantic right whale. They are really struggling, in large part due to vessel strikes, and we really have to get people to slow down their speeds through the Stellwagen Bank. When you're going through it on a boat, 842 square miles, it's pretty darn big, and we have to go very slow, but it's just too dangerous for these animals when we go so fast through there. We really have to work at reducing the underwater noise. It is having a detrimental effect on much of the sea life that is in the sanctuary. And the Stellwagen Bank is known to be a very loud place. Well, there's also a large impact, like the previous location, of fishing gear, from lobster traps to fishing line. In fact, for the first time in a long time, Cape Cod Bay was shut down to lobstering for a month because the whales were here and we needed to get them out of the bay and get the fishing, all of those lobster pots in to protect the whales. And the other thing out here is that everybody knows who to call when there's an entanglement or when there's a stranding of these sea life that come too close to our shores. We all know who we're supposed to call, and we do call them. I even recently called them as recently as February to tell them what we had seen on the beach. They were just put into action actually earlier this week with 5 whale strandings on our shores. So it's a place that's very fragile and we interact with it a lot when it comes close to us. Slide 3, please. This is a short video clip. My husband and I went up in a small plane and flew out over Cape Cod. And as we got down to Chatham, which is on the far edge away from where Stellwagen is, we saw these huge pods of seals. Now, these are mostly gray seals and harbor seals. And there were thousands upon thousands. This is just one clip. It goes on for about another 5 minutes of these pods of seals that have just come here. And they stay here because it is warm enough that they can be here for much longer in the year. Thank you for that slide. Stellwagen is, with all these seals, we also have a lot of great white sharks that are chasing them up the coast. And what used to be a rare sighting of a great white shark now is very common in the summer, and our beaches get closed frequently because the sharks are too close. And the beaches all now have permanent signs up warning about great white sharks, even in Cape Cod Bay. Stellwagen is really important as a national marine sanctuary for our local community, our economy, the geography, and our social life. We have large numbers of visitors that come out here to enjoy the waters, both being in them and being on them. The economy relies on tourists that are coming out here to see the waters, and then it helps all the local fishers who are going out there to get the food from the water for us. In our congregation, where I serve as a pastor, we're very concerned about how we can be good stewards of God's good creation. So we pray frequently for the health of our waters, and we're working to protect them for our children and our grandchildren and beyond. If we lose the Stellwagen Bank Sanctuary's protections right now, when these new regulations go into effect, it's directly going to impact our economy, my neighbor's ability to go fishing, and our belief that what we do now will be able to affect the future. Over the last 15 years, the herring population's been down in my town. It used to be that people would go to the herring run and get bait fish or to get great fertilizer for the gardens. Now, only the indigenous Wampanoag neighbors are the ones who are allowed to get the herring. The rest of us are shooing away the gulls and trying to make sure that the fish will get back out to the ocean when they run back. By protecting the Stellwagen Bank Sanctuary and its diverse resources and gifts, we can ensure that future locals and tourists both will have a place to come and enjoy God's good creation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Definitely sounds like a really special and important place. Awesome. So next, I'm going to hand it over to Chanelle Heason and Bob Bailey from the Alaka Alliance. So Chanelle is the Director of Outreach and Community Relations, and she's conducted marine science research on the Great Barrier Reef, worked at the Ritz-Carlton Reserve in Puerto Rico, and volunteered with river and sea otters at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And then Bob Bailey is the board president of the Alaka Alliance, and he spent nearly 40 years in coastal and ocean planning and management for the state of Oregon. So I'll hand it over to that crew.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having us here today. Thanks for that great introduction. I don't need to reintroduce myself now, but I'm Chanelle Heason, Director of Outreach and Community Relations for the Alaka Alliance. We are a nonprofit based in Oregon trying to reintroduce sea otters here on the Oregon coast. They were hunted for their fur over a century ago, and the last one that we have noted that was traded here in Oregon was in 1910. So we don't have any native sea otters on our coastline. And so we are trying to reintroduce them for their strong cultural significance with the Oregon Coast tribes, ecological reasons for our kelp forest ecosystems, and economically the benefits that would come from having healthier ecosystems out on our coastline for our coastal communities. So sea otters are a keystone species. So if you're not familiar with what that means, the keystone species has a disproportionately large effect on its environment relative to its abundance. So without sea otters present, the ecosystem is not functioning fully, properly, naturally, prosperity-wise. So it's kind of wild to think that nobody alive has ever seen what a healthy ecosystem looks like on the Oregon coast, and sea otters have been gone for over 112 years, unless there's someone that's 112 kicking still. That'd be pretty remarkable. But so we actually are going to do something a little different for our presentation. We have two really wonderfully made videos with the help of the Oregon Zoo. The first one we're going to introduce is about the ecological and economic benefits of sea otters on the Oregon coast and what that could mean for future reintroduction. So let me get that set up here. Hold on one second. All right, here we go. It's about 6 minutes.
I have a lot of respect for sea otters. They're in this super cold water without a blubber layer. You know, they're doing all this just with hair. It's pretty amazing that they can keep that up. And to keep that up, of course, they have to eat quite a lot.
They're so important to the ecosystem. One thing I think people don't really understand about them is that they've been extinct in Oregon since the early 1900s.
The reason that there's no sea otters in Oregon is that they were all hunted out. We don't know what it really would look like naturally. Everything we see is the result of over 100 years of one of the most important predators not being here. For people that have never been in a kelp forest before, it's pretty magical. It's kind of like the first
Chanelle, I think that the sound stopped.
So rockfish and salmon, they bring in little mysid shrimp, and that brings in gray whales. So these kelp forests support everything from the smallest invertebrates to the biggest vertebrates on our coast.
My name is Dave Lacey, and I own and operate a guided outfitter business here on the South Coast. We do whales and wildlife boat tours out of Port Orford. We also do some fishing and some kayaking, scuba diving, and snorkeling. People are pretty fascinated when we get to go in the kelp forest. You can pull up and just sit and enjoy the stillness. You can find all kinds of cool stuff that's like hiding in the fronds of the kelp. About 75% of Oregon's kelp forests are on the south coast where most of the rocky reef habitat is, and that's what kelp needs to grab onto. It needs to hold on to something solid like rock. 5 years ago, in certain places like Nellie's Cove in Port Orford, you would see a healthy kelp forest with all kinds of wildlife teeming in it and around it and above it. Now you go there and it's basically an urchin barren.
A sea urchin barren, it's barren in the sense that there's nothing else besides sea urchins. There's just so many purple sea urchins, which are herbivores, eating the kelp, that the new kelp has a really hard time establishing. Here in Oregon, we no longer have the major predators that would have affected kelp forests through their suppression of urchins. There's a pretty large area in the Port Orford Bay that had kelp forests there that haven't had those for a while. Plus, there's high densities of purple urchins. Any place where there used to be a kelp forest and it's been gone for 5 or 6 years, that does start to be alarming.
It was really drastic. Our business is completely connected to the health of the ecosystem here. And to see it go away so fast, I can't even express how concerned I am about it.
In kelp forests where sea otters are present, there's a lot less invertebrates out in the open, because if they are out in the open, the sea otters just eat them, especially things like sea urchins. One of the things that I work on in my own research is how kelp forests support marine food webs. Predators can eat the things that eat the kelp. So if they do that, that frees the kelp up from being eaten itself. Sea otters won't wipe out all of the invertebrates that they like to eat. The things that they like to eat, like urchins, abalone, evolved with them for thousands of years. So they will hide in the cracks. What's neat is that in a really well-functioning kelp forest, all that kelp that's growing there will generate detritus that falls down to the seafloor into those cracks and still feeds the invertebrates that live there. So predators have this indirect positive effect on kelp forests. There's now an effort led by the Ecological Alliance to bring sea otters back to Oregon.
Nobody alive today has ever seen what our ecosystem looks like with sea otters in it. They used to be here for thousands of years. The native people had this relationship with the sea otter. I think it's time to look at bringing them back and seeing what they can do to help make the balance the way it should be. And I think we need to be very careful and include other stakeholders' input. And really, I do care about my commercial fishermen friends, and I want to make sure that their bottom line isn't affected.
Otters will eat Dungeness crabs, so it's understandable that commercial fishers would be concerned about that. One thing to keep in mind about reintroducing sea otters to Oregon is that wherever that reintroduction occurs, those otters are likely going to stay in that area. They're going to move a little bit, but they're not going to spread like wildfire across all parts of Oregon. I think that they'll benefit our kelp forests, which will actually benefit our fisheries too. It'll drive quite a lot of tourism. Every place that people have reintroduced sea otters to their rightful range, so Southeast Alaska, British Columbia, California, amazing science has come out of that. People have studied how the communities respond to this important predator. So I want to see that happen in Oregon.
All of Oregon should care about this issue because the beach is yours. It's a public beach. All of Oregonians have this, and we take care of it so that anyone can come here and check it out. And I think it would be really nice if the sea otters were there to greet you.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Bob Bailey, for the next video.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming and participating today. This is really fabulous to hear about efforts in such far-flung places as the Pribilofs and Stellwagen banks and Oregon and elsewhere. So it's all one planet and it's all one ocean. So your protections are our protections. So we are here to try to reintroduce sea otters on your behalf too. It's not just for us. So one of the key aspects of our mission to reintroduce sea otters is the cultural aspects. We have members from 3 of our coastal Indian tribes on our board of directors, and they have provided a lot of practical as well as sort of moral guidance for us as we move this along. The Oregon Zoo made a fantastic video that can explain far better than I the cultural importance of restoring sea otters to Native people on the Oregon coast, both now and in the future. And so let's roll that. The man you will see in the video is Peter Hatch, who is on our board of directors.
This coast is such a place of raw and tremendous power where the world's biggest ocean comes up against the land. But it's also a nurturing place, the place that has sustained my ancestors and sustains all of us to this day. We rely on the bounty that the upwelling of the Pacific brings to our ecosystem. It's easy to come to this beautiful place and get the sense that because it's beautiful, everything is as it should be. But unfortunately, we inherit an ecosystem that is out of balance. And in large part, that's because of the absence of one particular animal, the sea otter. Since time before human memory, the people of this coast, my ancestors, shared our waters with sea otters. My name is Peter Hatch, and I'm a Siletz tribal member of Haniskus and Sayusla descent. Stories from our ancestors talk about a time when the boundaries between what we now think of as the human world and the animal world were a lot more fluid than they are today. There's an old story about a young Coos woman who married into the sea otter people and went to live out to sea and established a connection between us human people and the animal people that carries down through the generations. That relationship benefits both of us. Fundamentally, a lot of these beliefs boil down to trying to instill an appreciation for the resources that sustain us. By eating the sea urchins, sea otters keep them in check and help our kelp forests thrive. Modern ecology has been catching up to those ancestral understandings, those interconnections that people who've lived in this place have always known are there. In the different languages and dialects up and down the Oregon coast, there are at least 6 different words for sea otter. Near what we now call Depot Bay is a place that has been known to local Tillamook folks as Asihigil Shantish, which means Otter Rock, and today is known in English as Otter Rock Marine Reserve. Down south is a rocky point that Dani people have always known as Kashkashse, which again just means Sea Otter Rock. Today, it's still known in English as Otter Point. These place names and these stories are all we have left of Oregon's original sea otter population. The last Oregon sea otter that we know of was killed around 1910. The slaughter of Oregon sea otters occurred in parallel with the catastrophes that were affecting indigenous people of this region in the 19th century. Between the wars, the disease, the loss of land, the loss of life, the boarding schools, termination policy, and just the pure stigma around being Indian, it's a very real possibility that Oregon's tribes could have been wiped out completely. Sometimes we treat this very near history as ancient, but my great-grandmother Hattie was the only survivor among 9 brothers and sisters. My grandfather grew up around people who had been there at the signing of the treaties in the 1850s. My dad's generation grew up as members of a tribe that, in the eyes of the government, no longer existed. These historical forces shape who our families are and how many of us there are even to this day. Despite it all, we survived and Oregon sea otters didn't, and that relationship was broken. Back in the late 90s, my dad, Dave Hatch, was looking for a name for a small boat that we'd built together, and in a Chinook dictionary happened across the term Ilaka, or sea otter.
As my dad started to dig deeper, he started to realize how much all Oregonians stood to gain by restoring sea otters to our ocean. That led down a path of research, activism, and connecting people that formed the Ilaka Alliance. After his passing in 2016, we got back together, a group of us that had been touched by his work, to make something meaningful out of that. It was time to try to bring them back. Today we face tremendous uncertainties about the future of the Oregon coast. There are many threats, and in so many ways we're always on defense. But this project is a chance to do something proactive. We have the power to heal this place where we live. It's not about grasping for what little we have left. It's about trying to restore something that we've lost and thereby create a better future. We have a tremendous effort ahead and many people that need to be at the table as decisions are made. But there's hope here, there's potential here, and many people who have heard about this project have met us with tremendous good spirit and have offered their help as we move forward. Long after I'm gone, I hope that my descendants will still be able to go to these rivers on this coast to gather mussels and to fish for salmon, and that when they're out there offshore, they'll see Ilaka. We're not just restoring a species, we're bringing back a relative.
All right, thank you very much, everyone. And you can see what I mean, that these dual aspects of our work are so important, and the cultural aspects give it such depth and meaning, and the ecological, economic stuff is all on top of that. But go to our website, Ilaka Alliance, check us out, support us, spread the word. We're going to get her done. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bob and Chanelle. Those videos were both incredible. We have a few minutes for some Q&A, so definitely go put any questions in the Q&A chat. And then we've got a couple in here that I'm going to have us answer for the group because I don't think everyone can see them. So the first one that I've got is from Jeffrey. And will melting of icebergs, rising sea temps change the feeding and shorelines enough to endanger the wildlife there, including moving fish species, etc.? And I think this was about the Pribilof Islands.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. I think those are all impacts that we're seeing in a really dramatic way, and that they are already impacting our species' ability to survive. So moving more towards what we would call endangered. I think our communities would certainly say that the changes in distribution of fish species, which have been impacted by warming temperatures, lack of sea ice, all of the very classic signs of climate change, have impacted every part of the food web. We have seen die-offs of seabirds recently, to the point that some of the colonies on our islands just aren't there anymore, virtually absent. Are they endangered? I don't, we don't know. We don't know if they've just moved further north or they've moved away from the islands, or if we're seeing a true decline in the population. The big issue with Alaska is that a lot of our colonies for things like seabirds are on uninhabited islands and remote parts where it's very hard to get any type of monitoring or population estimates on a reliable basis. And so it's such a hard question to put a hard number on through monitoring. But I think certainly the big concern is that we are seeing such dramatic losses in sea ice, such dramatic increasing temperatures, and very dramatic moving of species. They're going further north, they're diving deeper in the water column, migration patterns are messed up, and it's just very, very dramatic. And so I know endangered has like a legal sense. In the more general, are things in danger? Are they threatened? Are they vulnerable to these changes? I think absolutely the answer is yes.
Great. And then we had another question for you, Lauren, how the process of establishing a marine protected area around the Pribilofs is going, and then what are, if there are any significant objections?
Certainly there are objections. Thanks for this question. I will say what we've proposed is not by legal definitions a marine protected area. We are requesting a national marine sanctuary, which does allow activities that a marine protected area does not. However, the unique piece of our proposal is that we have asked for a co-management governance structure where it is equitable representation and decision-making power between our tribal government and the federal government, and potentially the state of Alaska, which is, kind of to be determined. But the state of Alaska is actually one of our biggest sources of objection, and that's because we have a governor and authority in the state that doesn't want to see area-based conservation in any form or fashion in the state of Alaska. We do have things like marine mammal areas to be avoided and buffer zones. We have some conservation zones. The effectiveness of those are questionable. They've never been evaluated for their conservation efforts or value. And they just in general are one of our, least favorable, maybe opposers, I guess I should say. I will not sugarcoat it. And then large scale fishing industry. So these industrial, very large vessels that are deploying trawls on the bottom and dragging the bottom of the ocean, that are having large carbon, emissions and footprints, and just large scale industrial fisheries that are mostly export and not Alaskan based. They're based outside the state of Alaska or owned and operated outside the state of Alaska, are also probably some of our biggest opposition, which I think is pretty common across conservation efforts.
Definitely. Thank you. So then I've got one for Bob and for Chanelle. Can you talk a little bit about what are some of the specific plans to bring back otters?
That's a good question. I typed a very brief answer back. There's a lot of work going on right now, the specific plans. We do not have a specific timeline, if that's part of the question. We've got a strategic plan that has two key elements. The first is to build public support, the consensus that this is a good idea. The second one is to do the science necessary to answer key questions about reintroducing them, potential effects, the best places to bring them back, where would the source populations be, what kinds of diseases do they face, blah, 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 all that stuff. So we're well underway with both those strategic objectives. Chanelle is working hard on the first one, the public consensus and outreach. And I'm working a lot with others, including a guy on our staff who's actually on this call, to work with the local community to bring that science-based approach to our decision-making. When we feel that we've got in the communities that will be most affected on this, particularly on the Southern Oregon coast, and we feel like we've got their support, then we're going to be working with our partners at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to actually go through their rather extensive process. It's not a quick and easy thing, but I'm optimistic that within 4 to 5 years, we will be bringing animals back. That's my hope. I'm not getting any younger, so I want to get this done.
Definitely. And then Bob, it sounded like you mentioned this before, but this is not the first time that sea otters have been reintroduced to an area, and it's been successful historically.
Good question. In the 1970s, 70 and 71, 93 otters were brought from Amchitka Island up in the Aleutian chain as part of a campaign with the wildlife agencies at the time to get sea otters out of harm's way for underground atomic testing. There were several hundred animals translocated to Southeast Alaska, Prince William Sound, Vancouver Island, the Olympic coast in Washington, and the coast of Oregon. In Oregon, that population persisted for about 10 years, although gradually declined, and eventually by 1981 had winked out. And today we believe we know why, which was basically not enough of them were here to survive the mortality that naturally occurs during that period of time. So there are some lessons to be learned from past introductions. The introductions on the Olympic coast, Vancouver Island, Southeast Alaska, all of those were very successful. And today will likely provide the source population for what we intend to do, along with, we hope, some of the surrogate reared pups that come from the Monterey Bay Aquarium in California. And this would help to reunite the gene flow between the southern sea otter in California and the northern sea otters in Canada and Alaska. And I will give a shout out to Hannah Wellman, who's participating in this call today. She's been doing a lot. She was a graduate of the University of Oregon in anthropology and has done a lot of work on the genetics and other aspects of the gene flow that would be a condition as we look to reunite the northern and southern subspecies. A lot of work to do, but we're getting there.
Definitely. It's so interesting. Before this call started, when we were just chatting, this is something that comes up in the Pribilof Islands as well, where they've got sea urchin barrens because there's not enough otters as well.
Yeah.
So interesting.
That's a phenomenon that was actually, it was noted within about 20 years after the Russians swept through in the Aleutian Islands and took the otters out, that sea captains started noticing in the shallows these vast expanses of urchins. So it's a long-lasting change to the ecosystem of the entire West Coast. And we hope to be able to contribute to helping to fill in this 800-mile gap between the population in Washington and the population in California. It won't come overnight. I mean, we're planting a seed that's like an oak tree. It's going to take a long time for it to really grow out, but we're going to do our best.
Definitely. Very cool. So then I think we've got one more question around the sea otter reintroduction, and that's about sort of what the opposition looks like for reintroducing sea otters.
Well, as you might guess, the shellfishers in Oregon listen to their colleagues up and down the coast. And what they're hearing out of Alaska, Southeast Alaska, is that the return of sea otters throughout the archipelagos there have really affected some of the shellfish harvest, crabs, clams, sea cucumbers, and so on. So their red flags went up for them immediately, but they haven't actually opposed us. They've just raised a lot of concerns. And one of the things that we've done is to do a feasibility study that identifies kind of the parameters around where sea otters would live if they come back. And now, literally today, we're working with some folks to build out some GIS capacity to analyze where crab harvest currently takes place and where sea otters might live, and look at the geographic overlap of those two. And it looks like it's going to be relatively minor, but so then we take those minor areas and we zoom in and try to work with the crabbers at the local level to really understand their crabbing practices. Frank Burris, who's also in this call, is our liaison on the Southern Oregon coast, who's a longtime resident of Curry County. And so he's going to be working with the crabbers down there and the urchin divers to really suss out the areas and the techniques that they use to crab, and see if there are ways that we can mitigate or avoid the major impacts. The flip side is that bringing sea otters back is going to really help over time rebuild the productivity of the ecosystem that benefits all fisheries, whether it's crabbers, shellfishers, or finfishers. And on the Oregon coast, most guys have multiple rigs. I mean, they crab part of the year, they rockfish part of the year, they go halibut fishing part of the year. So overall, there's a strong case to be made that bringing sea otters back is going to enhance fisheries overall.
Definitely. Okay. Well, thank you so much, all. We are at time. So do my panelists have any last words before we wrap up?
Go to alakaalliance.org. Check us out, donate, spread the word.
Definitely. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I say thank you for the opportunity to be here today. It's wonderful.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining. I really appreciate it. It was great learning about all of these different places and what are some of the threats and what we can do to protect them.